Good morning, afternoon, evening, greetings of the day wherever you're dialing from. I'm Divik. I work for a company called London Bridge Associates here in the UK. I'm also the sub-chair for BTSYM, looking after professional development of those under 35. So today my presentation is called So You Want to Make a Tunnel, and the subtitle is Tunneling in an Urban Environment and Managing Third-Party Interfaces in London. Just a quick note, I will not be covering much to do with settlement impact, because settlement impact in London has been written about extensively already. So if you want to look that up, there's plenty of industry publications that cover it, which are available for freely online. I will, however, be concentrating on those less glamorous things that we don't often talk about, but are equally important when you're considering impact on third-party assets, if not a lot more important in certain cases, as we'll see. So, to be honest, the title is sort of stolen from an article that Benwell Jones published on his LinkedIn in 2017. The article is called So How Do We Build a Tunnel? And in the article, Benwell covers the challenges of even planning a tunnel, let alone constructing one in a congested town like London. And he says it's like a Swiss cheese down there, and let's be careful of the fact that London is as busy overground as it is underground. And my addition to that whole article would basically be along the lines of, let's not forget that we need to get the machines into the ground before we start tunneling, so let's not ignore the impact of your piling, a shaft construction, but also fulfilling the purpose of the tunnel, so making those connection structures which might not necessarily be completely underground. So that's London in all its glory, established by the Romans in 47 AD. It survived the plague, the Great Fire, 2 world wars, times of trouble. Here it is today. The modern Babylon, if you were to trust Disraeli, if Dizzy from Victorian era doesn't float your boat, and you're more of an Oscar Wilde person, a person of taste, I'd remind you that the man who can dominate a London dinner table can dominate the world, and I think it sort of applies to someone who can dominate the world of infrastructure delivery in a place like London. And you will see why I say something like that. But here's London Underground as we know it, the London Underground that we love and hate during rush hours. Here's the map transposed onto a satellite image with other rail assets showing. So these other assets may be at surface level in cuttings or on viaducts. There's an old map of the sewer network made by Bazalgette to solve the Great Stink in the 19th century. I don't show a map of the utilities that plague the subterranean London because there are numerous of them, and really it is like a Swiss cheese below ground level. I can't talk about London and not mention famous attractions. You've got Battersea Power Station, Westminster and London Eye, Tottenham Court Road, St Paul's, trendy East London arches, perhaps not that arch specifically. There are trendy ones. Or if you don't like any of those, I mean, if you're a James Bond person, there is the MI6 office right there, but there's also all these tunneling sites dotted around. And if you look at the London skyline, you see a lovely TBM, yes. I think that beats them all. but I might be slightly biased because it's a Tidal Bay stadium. But let's quickly play a game of Where's Waldo. So Where's Waldo is probably on a construction site or a tunneling site, more specifically, I think, because that's a tunneling site. So is that. I think you get the picture by now. So these are all sites littered around town, either currently active tunneling sites or have been within the past 3 years. But as you can see, they are all in constrained spaces because there is no sorts of free land available in town. So who do you interface with when you're trying to deliver a project? There's the obvious one, Transport for London and its subsidiaries, DLR, London Underground, Crossrail, but there's also Network Rail, which are a separate entity, by the way. But these are railway and major tunnel owners and bridges as well. Then there is your utility companies, the BTs and the Thames Water for water, National Grid for electricity, Cadence Energy for gas, and there's the local council, which there are more than what's shown on the screen, and those are the people you deal with when it comes to even lorry movements and number of lorries that will be coming to your site and between what time. There's a slightly less obvious ones, Canals and River Trust, who manage the canal system and any bridges. Environment Agency, who regulate the water aquifers. So if you're doing a boreholes, which risk cross-contamination of an aquifer, you need to consult with them. But also if you're impacting a river wall or any flood defense, they are the people you go to. Port of London Authority, if you're using the river as a means of transport, or if you're doing construction work within the river, you have to consult both PLA and Marine Management Organization. Now, the less obvious one here is Ministry of Defense, who may sometimes have interests in land under or above your tunnel. And let's not forget the good old residents. They own houses as well. They spend their life saving on buying them, so they need to be respected equally. So you still want to build a tunnel? Fair enough, challenge accepted. So you need a proposed alignment, a construction method, of course a design as well, logistics plan, a settlement impact assessment, and once you've got all this, then you can apply for a permission to construct, or what we can call a safeguarding vessel, which can come in various forms, but we wouldn't delve into it. In addition to your safeguarding vessel, you need something called an asset protection agreement signed, which is a legal agreement signed between the client, usually novated over to the contractor, the client and a critical third-party stakeholder. So these are people who own critical assets like railways, tunnels, and so on. The asset protection agreement provides a schedule of all interfacing assets. It nominates a stakeholder's representative who might review any submissions you have. It also lists down approval requirements and survey and monitoring requirements and so on. So let's use a live project like Tidal Bay as an example. So Thames Tidal Bay Tunnel is a storm relief sewer which aims to clean River Thames by capturing any outflow of sewage from the existing sewer network into River Thames during heavy rainfall events. And you can find more information, and please do go on to their website to find more information. It's a fascinating project. So that's their website, tidalbay.london. You can also look up previous lectures on BTS's YouTube channel to find out more about the project. But in a nutshell, Tidal Bay is a storm relief sewer from west to east, 25 kilometers in length, 7.2 meters internal diameter. But the project itself has various other connection tunnels, multiple shafts, and multiple interception chambers. I am involved with the eastern section, working for CVB JV. We have two tunnels, the main tunnel and a connection tunnel. Our tunnels are 50 to 65 meters below ground level, constructed using Heron Connect mixed shields in chalk. So along our alignment, we actually interface with plethora of our assets. So it's not just tunnels, but also around sites. So we've got 40 bridges in total throughout the project, 10 tunnels, including Brunel's Thames Tunnel, which was the first under-river crossing constructed by Mark Brunel. It's the first under-river crossing in the world. If you ever visit London, go and visit Brunel Museum, and you can actually go into one of the shafts of the tunnel. But yeah, we've got railway tracks, heritage structure, the lot. In total, we deal with 4,800 identified structures. To give you an example of the constraints, actually, and this is very typical of any site in London, not just this specific site. That's where our drive shaft is. That's an existing Thames Water pumping station we're connecting into. That stays live during the construction works. Of course, the grounds are littered with Thames Water assets, sewers, some known, some unknown. There are 2 active rail lines there as well, so that's DLR, that's a network rail bridge, and sandwiched between them is a substation. We've also got these river walls, which are also heritage structures, acting as the flood defense. So it is a constrained site, and this is getting more and more common because there is no spare space available over ground. So what are the key risks? Now, settlement, of course, yes, but really, what are the risks? Remember, we need to get the equipment into the ground before we can start tunneling. What about these things? Cranes, your excavators. What about the hand drill? Interesting, right? So let's look at it. Let's ignore settlement. Let's crack on. Surcharge loading damages buried structures. Obvious, right? Let's look at slightly less obvious ones. Lifting, especially next to a railway. What if your crane was to topple and fall onto the railway? And the rail's operational, by the way. So now that becomes a derailment hazard, which can lead to mass casualty. Excavation near buried services. Okay, yes, you've got operative injury and, as a risk, but in worst cases, unfortunately, fatality can take place as well. God forbid. But there's also things like a gas main, you will, and if it's a highly pressurized one, you will have to evacuate substantial amount of properties in your immediate vicinity. Surely you don't want to take that risk. Let alone the safety side of it, the commercial side of it is equally crazy. Drilling into heritage structures. Again, this is the fabric of a history. Yes, it's not as glamorous for some as engineering and constructing great structure is, but it is our history. It has to be respected. So you need to make sure you drill into the right part of the heritage structure and not the important one. Semi-permanent structures next to railway. Now, this was an interesting one that I experienced, where if you actually try to erect a large shed near a railway, for example, you need to make sure that it does not jeopardize the line of sight of the driver, and the driver can still see the signal. Otherwise, you might be jeopardizing operational safety. Again, lives of innocent people, members of public, are at risk here. The lives need to be protected, just like anyone else's life, just like your ops life, your own life. But be careful. Think about things outside the box. Vibration is another such example. Yes, it can jeopardize structural integrity, but did you know sometimes old electrical equipment, when they're subjected to high vibration, can actually turn into an explosion risk beyond a certain threshold? Who knew? So these are the things we don't often talk about, but there's other things as well. Another interface. So, in the words of Monty Python, what had the Romans ever done for us? Now, they gave us a lot of things like this lovely theatre in London buried under Guildhall, and other structures that keep popping up whenever you try to dig the earth. It's not just structures that keep popping up, it's also burials. And not just Roman ones. London's got a long history. There's a long list of what you can find. But when you have such a situation, you get archaeologists who come up to catalogue it and to preserve it if they are of historic significance. But it all takes time, and it leads to time and cost impact. And that interface needs to be planned well in advance, and right contingency needs to be put in place. You say digging with a toothbrush does not scare you? Then lo and behold, bombs. In World War II, the Nazis bombed UK. Unfortunately, a lot of bombs exploded, but some of them did not. And how do we know that they did not? We keep finding them. So here's a news clipping from Guardian. There's 2 more news clippings in the recent year. Fortunately, there is extensive industry guidance on managing the risks due to unexploded ordnances in place. People use it rigorously and on most construction projects. But again, anything that has an explosion risks by default becomes a third-party impact and has to be managed in conjunction with stakeholders. So how do we build our tunnel? We plan, we assess, we do the same things as we do to manage any risks, but with a slight difference, I would say. We seek information to validate our assumptions, and as much information as we can during a planning phase. We identify hazards, but we involve stakeholders during hazard identification, because remember, your biggest risk is the risk you're unaware of, because that risk is the one that remains unmitigated. And it's the stakeholder who might know those risks or hazards. So get them involved early on, get them on board. To give you an example, the thing with the electric asset turning into an explosion hazard, we only found out about the risk when we involved the stakeholder. After you've involved the stakeholder and you assess the risk and mitigate it, then you develop your methodology. Once you've done so, you still seek stakeholders' approval on your methodology. Once it's been approved, you implement it, you monitor, you evaluate, you try to improve if things are not going the way you thought they would be going. But during this implementation and monitoring phase, you need to communicate with the stakeholder. So stakeholder involvement and communication is the key. The earlier you do that, the better it is. And the tagline here and the gospel that I follow is collaborate, don't hate. Be open with the stakeholder and work together. So now something slightly different, and just to touch on the harsh reality that I've actually learned about what I've been doing. So managing interfaces require a combination of engineering, management, and commercial skills. You need to understand various approaches to risk, spot deficiencies in your knowledge, and ask for help and opinion when required, and as much as you can. Admit your mistakes when you make mistakes, learn from mistakes, understand people, and be understanding of them. And it's nothing you can't learn. So these are the 4 books that actually helped me shape my approach to things. But if you're not a book person, show up to your nearest lecture and talk to people afterwards. That's how I've learned most of the things I know. Nothing beats exchanging experiences over a coffee or a drink. So on that note, I wrap up my presentation. Thanks for listening, and I'll take any questions during the Q&A.